Right now, today, if your savings are sitting in a typical bank account, you are losing money, not might. R. The FDIC's own published national average rate on savings accounts is 0.38% a year. As of this month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics just reported inflation running at 4.2% over the past year. That gap, nearly 4 full percentage points, is not my opinion. It's two government numbers, both public, both dated this month, sitting right next to each other, and you can pull both of them up yourself in under 30 seconds. This isn't a video about feeling bad about your bank balance. It's an audit using numbers the government already published that most people never bother to put side by side. That's not even the headline. What actually matters is what that one habit, repeated for 20 or 30 years, does to where you land in the wealth of this country. According to the Federal Reserve's most recent survey of consumer finances, the median American household, the actual middle, the 50th percentile, is worth $192,900. The average household is worth $1,060,000. That's not a typo. The average sits roughly 5.5 times higher than the typical household in the same survey, the same year. Worth saying plainly, this is the most recent data the Fed has released. They run this survey only once every 3 years, and the next one isn't expected until late this year or next, so this is the real current benchmark, not an old number standing in for a new one. A relatively small number of households at the very top are the reason the average sits so far above where most people actually stand. Here's what that gap is not. It is not luck, and it is not some secret asset class only insiders get access to. It comes down to about 4 repeatable decisions. Decisions anyone can check against their own bank statement tonight, no spreadsheet required. One of them involves a kind of debt that mathematically works in your favor, and most people have it exactly backwards. I'll get to that one shortly, because once you hear it, you won't look at a loan the same way again. Let's start with Marcus. Marcus keeps $18,000 sitting in a regular savings account, well beyond what he actually needs for emergencies because cash feels safe. At that 0.38% rate, he earns about $68 in interest this year. Meanwhile, at 4.2% inflation, that same $18,000 would need several $100s more just to buy what it bought 12 months ago. He didn't lose anything on paper. He lost it in what that money can actually purchase. That's habit 1. Holding far more cash than an emergency fund requires and calling it safety, when the math says it's a quiet, guaranteed loss. Priya does something different with the part of her cash beyond her own emergency fund. She puts it into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. You can check this next part yourself. Going back to 1926, in the long-run return data tracked by researchers like NYU Stern's finance department, the S&P 500 has averaged close to 10% a year before inflation, with dividends reinvested. After inflation, that's closer to 7% a year. That is a 100-year average, not a promise for next year. Inside that average are individual years that lost more than 30%, and individual years that gained more than 30%. Priya isn't betting on next year specifically. She's betting that a 100-year average holds up over her own multi-decade timeline, the same way it has through depressions, world wars, and recessions. Habit 2 is waiting for some imaginary moment when you finally have enough money to start, instead of starting with whatever's left after the emergency fund and giving time the room it needs to compound. Here's why that distinction is worth more than it sounds like. Marcus and Priya both started with the same $18,000. Leave it sitting in that 0.38% savings account for 30 years and, even after that small bit of interest, it grows to roughly $20,000. Put that same $18,000 into an investment tracking that 7% historical real return instead, and after 30 years, in today's purchasing power, it grows to somewhere around $137,000. That's the same starting amount. The same 30 years, the same person, with one decision separating an outcome of $20,000 from an outcome of well over $100,000. That gap is not a rounding error. It is the entire video, expressed in one number. 2 down, 2 to go. The next one is the habit most people get backwards without ever realizing it, and the one after that is so simple, sitting right inside most paychecks, that almost nobody actually uses it properly. Marcus paid off his car loan early at 4% interest, then turned down a mortgage offered at 5% because debt felt dangerous either way, so he kept renting instead. The actual mechanism gets mischaracterized constantly online, so let's be precise about it. A fixed-rate mortgage can be productive debt when it's attached to a reasonably priced property, bought at a rate locked for 30 years. in a market where home prices have historically trended upward over long stretches while incomes tend to rise around that fixed payment. That's a conditional statement, not a guarantee. Buy at an inflated price in a declining market with property taxes and maintenance eating the upside, and that same mortgage stops looking productive at all. A car loan, by contrast, is debt against an asset guaranteed to lose value the moment you drive it off the lot, regardless of price paid or market conditions. Same word, debt, two completely different mathematical animals. Treating all debt as equally dangerous isn't caution. It's a refusal to do the math on what the debt is actually attached to. Habit 3 is failing to separate debt tied to an appreciating asset at a fixed, reasonable rate from debt tied to something that's already losing value and reacting to the word instead of the numbers behind it. Last one, Priya routes part of her investing through a traditional 401k retirement account. Why that matters comes down to mechanics, not emotion. In a normal taxable brokerage account, dividends get taxed the year you receive them, and gains get taxed when you sell. Inside that 401k or a traditional individual retirement account, none of that happens year to year. Dividends and gains compound completely untouched until you withdraw the money, often decades later. You will pay ordinary income tax on it eventually, but in exchange, your money gets 30 or 40 uninterrupted years of compounding instead of getting skimmed annually along the way. Habit 4 is treating a tax advantage account as optional paperwork instead of the single easiest structural edge available to almost every working American, regardless of income. So here's the upgrade. These 4 habits will not fully explain the distance between $192,000 and $1,060,000. Income, inheritance, business ownership, and plain geography all play a real role too, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But these 4 habits show up again and again among households that steadily build wealth over time, regardless of how much they started with. They're unglamorous decisions made consistently for decades while inflation and compounding quietly do their work whether you're watching or not. None of these 4 habits require a windfall, a perfect entry point, or information that isn't already public. None of this changes the reality that plenty of households are stretched thin enough that saving anything feels impossible some months, and that's a real constraint these numbers don't erase. The point isn't that everyone can act on all 4 right now. It's that when money is available to save or invest, where it sits and how it's structured makes a measurable difference. And every number in this video came from a government agency or a public market record to prove it. You need to stop calling idle cash safety when the math says otherwise. Stop waiting for a starting line that doesn't actually exist. Learn to judge debt by what it's attached to instead of the word itself, and stop leaving a tax-advantaged account half-used. Pull up your own bank statement tonight and run those same numbers against your own money. That's the only homework this video is giving you. If this changed how you look at your own accounts, subscribe,